This is a seminar on neurodiversity, so before going into the next part of my talk, I want to play you this short video on belonging taken during my Cal years.
I want to talk to you about inclusion and belonging for people with disabilities. Acceptance and inclusion of disabled people into all walks of society is no doubt an important first step. But what we need goes beyond inclusion. Inclusion means just existing in the same space as non-disabled people. Disabled people need to not just be included, we need to feel we belong. Belonging is a sense of community, where you are accepted as an equal member of the group and where your life is seen as having worth. Belongingness in society is, I think, what we all yearn for at the end of the day, whether we are disabled or not. Starting today, let us all strive together towards belongingness for people with disabilities.
You just saw the video on belonging. Before continuing, I want to ask you all a question. What does belonging mean to you? I will pause the video for around 5 minutes. Type your answers in chat or unmute and say your response. Or email them to me later. There are no wrong answers. Coming to the main part of my talk that focuses on neurodiversity. As you listen, think about who is getting left out of the conversation, and what are the narrative gaps, and what can we do to change it. Let's start with the origin story. How did the idea of neurodiversity start? We frequently give sole credit of the whole neurodiversity idea to sociologist Judy Singer. But as Monique Boda's 2024 paper points out, this perspective overlooks all the broader grassroots activism of the autistic community in the 1990s. Discussions on platforms, like the Independent Living List, along with advocates such as Jim Sinclair, played a pivotal role in shaping neurodiversity's core ideas. Inspired by the disability rights movement of the 1960s and 1970s, these autistic self-advocates adapted the social model of disability to include neurological differences. As a social construct, neurodiversity has been a cultural and political powerhouse. It pushes society to rethink how it values cognitive differences. However, even as the concept has gained traction, its broad scope and some inherent vagueness has led to varying interpretations and competing goals among advocates. So we see these ongoing debates around its scope, priorities, and inclusivity. As I started thinking more about the neurodiversity movement, I noticed a recurring theme: a number of false binaries that felt oversimplified. They didn't match the complex realities experienced by autistic and other neurodivergent individuals, especially those with higher support needs. I began wondering, could we borrow insights from broader disability frameworks to refine or expand neurodiversity itself? That's when I started working on what I call Neurodiversity 2.0. I noticed a series of common either-or dilemmas. Each one is often treated like a stark choice. Yet we're missing the nuance that true inclusion demands. I've covered many other things in my paper, but, for the rest of this talk, I'll walk through these binaries and reflect on how we might move beyond them, taking a more integrated approach that better reflects real life and supports all of us. One of the most persistent cultural assumptions embedded in neurodiversity conversations is the ideal of independence. Autonomy is equated with the ability to function without assistance. That independence means dignity. This is the mark of success. So what it mean for those who rely on long-term supports for daily living, communication, or behavioral regulation or other health challenges. For some, independence may not be possible or desirable due to the nature of their disability. It's called a disability for a reason. But the dominant narrative means the disabled person is made to feel like a failure. Does a disabled life have less worth because they need a support person with them or need extra assistance? For example, independent living for many high-support autistics often translates to living alone with rotating paid staff, resulting in transient and unstable relationships. Given the high turnover in the low-paid caregiving professions, these individuals frequently experience repeated losses of connection. There is also some double standard involved. While neurotypical people, or even the more independent neurodiverse individuals, naturally orient toward building lifelong family relationships in adulthood, high-support individuals are told that their measure of success means living away from their families, who are often their primary long-term stable relationship, and relying solely on less permanent paid staff. The consequence is economic disenfranchisement, social isolation, and a loss of human connection. This vision of independence is more isolating than empowering. When policies and social norms equate independence with dignity, they make interdependence invisible. The irony is that while interdependence is often framed as a disability issue, even neurotypical individuals who appear self-sufficient rely on social, familial, and professional networks. Recognizing interdependence as a universal human experience challenges the false binary between independence versus dependence, reinforcing the need for support systems. Autonomy does not mean self-sufficiency. Many can express agency through shared decision-making and stable caregiving relationships. To help us understand this idea, we can borrow from two existing ideas to enhance our Neurodiversity 2.0 framework. Care ethics reframes support not as a deficit, but as part of a dignified life. Dependence on caregiving networks is not a failure, but a fundamental part of human relationships. It emphasizes empathy, reciprocity, and moral responsibility in caregiving. Relational autonomy builds on this by saying autonomy is not developed in isolation, but through relationships. An example is supported decision-making, where individuals along with support networks make informed choices with assistance. This shows you can have autonomy and participation without sacrificing personal dignity. However, SDM may not be feasible for everyone. Some may need more protective frameworks, depending on the nature and extent of their disabilities. The point is that relational autonomy is not a lesser form of independence, it is a different pathway to meaningful agency. This parallels concepts like deaf-gained, which emphasize how diverse modes of communication enrich societal engagement. We can make use of ideas like care ethics and relational autonomy to inform policies that promote interdependence, shared responsibility, dignity in care, and environments that enable participation. We can improve on what neurodiversity means. Our next binary. We often see labels discussed in two extreme ways. They are good because they're essential for accessing resources. Labels create stigma, so must be abolished. In truth, labels like autistic, or ADHD, also help people find identity and community. But, when you have labels, like complex needs, low functioning, high support, or profound, this risks being branded as too burdensome or resource intensive. Stigma theory talks about how society creates a spoiled identity label for people who can't perform independence. Crip theory reminds us that even in the disability space, some forms of difference are privileged. The real solution? We have to change the narrative so that labels do not gatekeep or degrade. They should function as keys to the supports each person needs. Earlier we had talked about how societal narratives around independence were leading to exclusion. In this binary, let's look at economic narratives. At the root of many of the exclusionary narratives is human capital theory, which ties your value to economic productivity. In the neurodiversity arena, this has morphed into what is called neurodiversity light, a simplified, corporate-friendly version of neurodiversity that glorifies marketable traits like innovation, hyperfocus, and creativity. Autistics are portrayed as geniuses and savants, having superpowers, all of which appeals to the potential corporate employers. No doubt, this narrative will definitely help a certain slice of neurodiverse individuals. Skills and talents are a spectrum, and there are many talented autistics. But it creates unrealistic expectations of the majority of other autistics, who don't fit the tech genius profile. The danger is it ignores and excludes those whose strengths cannot be easily monetized. Only those seen as economic assets within neurodiversity get included. The call to action here is to help change what is the dominant narrative, so that you help change perception. Value disabled individuals beyond marketable traits. Genuine inclusion must not hinge on profit potential. This economic issue is inherent, even within the very laws meant to protect us. For instance, we have this amazing law, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It mandates accommodations. But then it adds the caveat of reasonable. The power of what is reasonable seems to lie with the employer. If there are 2 neurodiverse employees, the one needing more accommodations will be seen as burdensome and resource-intensive. And what happens if there are competing needs? Whose needs will get priority, and who gets to decide this? It's not enough to talk of an idealized neurodiversity. We need to walk the walk by identifying and resolving the problems. Now moving on to our next false binary, the role of medicine in neurodiversity and autism discourse. This is often framed in terms of the social model and medical model of disability, which are seen as opposites. A simplistic view is that one fixes the environment, the other fixes the person. This view has led to intense opposition to any kind of medical research into autism, because by default, anything medical means, it must be fixing autism. The reality on the ground is that there are a disproportionate number of autistics with health and medical issues. These desperately need biomedical research and attention. All this does is to worsen the problem of diagnostic overshadowing. And many of you may be familiar with this phenomena. Any health issue you have is usually dismissed off by healthcare providers as being part of this autism bucket. The irony is that the same symptoms would get looked into and treated if there was no autism label attached to that person. Because it's all part of autism, nothing more needs to be done. You are told to live with it, or are often just redirected to behavioral therapy. In turn, this is reinforcing the hierarchies present in autism. The dominant neurodiversity narrative is essentially telling this big chunk of autistics that they must put up with a poor quality of life. I believe this is a big reason for the huge rift between parents of high-support autistics and adult autistic self-advocates. It's about whose experiences are being centered in the dominant narratives. Most parents want their autistic family member to succeed, and are not inherently against acceptance and inclusion. But reality is only exclusion. For instance, how many social programs will accept autistics with self-injurious behaviors or aggressive behaviors? Even caregivers want only the easy clients. So many of my adult peers are stuck at home with aging parents as primary caregivers. Long-term solutions are needed. Psychotropic meds for behaviors are not the long-term solutions, they have mixed results and carry long-term health effects. If behavioral therapy was the solution, there would not be so many adults with behavioral issues as they would have intense amounts of that therapy from childhood. So we need to dig deeper to address these at a physiological level, and for that we need medical research. In the meantime, the dominant narrative of acceptance alone being enough may feel like gaslighting to such autistics and families. That is probably the reason for this big push for a separate profound autism diagnosis. My point is that it's not an either-or choice. We actually need both the social and medical. It's kind of counterintuitive to think that just because you are autistic, you will have zero medical needs now, or later in your life, as you age. Studies already show that we react differently to medications, so we need the research into how we can tailor it to our needs. And we need all the social parts too. It boils down to living a decent quality of life. There is actually a model, the biopsychosocial model, which views disability as an integration of biological, psychological, and environmental factors, without reducing it to any single cause. The World Health Organization gives this idea a formal structure with their classification system. So our Neurodiversity 2.0 integrates lived experience, emphasizing that social accommodations and medical treatments work together. A practical example is collaborative care teams that bring together psychologists, educators, disability service providers, medical professionals, and the individual with their support system, and families, as active partners in decision-making. These teams recognize that social inclusion, medical care, and communication access are interconnected and that the best outcomes arise when care plans are shaped around the whole person. Our next binary is around strengths and deficits. The dominant narrative says we must focus on strengths, while a deficit focus definitely denies the capabilities of a person. Just looking only at strengths also risks minimizing real challenges. Again, it's not an either-or choice. We need to be looking at both. What I term as an opportunity solutions approach moves beyond these divisions, recognizing that supports enable strengths to be fully realized, but only if solutions concurrently work to solve challenges that make opportunity inaccessible. What I mean by this is that we take a dual approach. We create opportunities that leverage strengths. We simultaneously work on solutions to address the challenges, which allow for access to those opportunities. A door analogy helps illustrate this idea. We create doors that lead to opportunities, in education, in the workplace and in the community and more. Opening the doors of opportunity benefits many, improving quality of life and more. All the good stuff. Some will have an easier time stepping through the doors and availing of strengths-based opportunities, if we create these doors well. However, it is not enough to simply create doors of opportunities that focused on strengths. Many autistics will still remain stuck on the wrong side of the door. For autistics, such as those with high support needs, or other complex needs, even approaching the door may require concurrently working on solutions to their areas of challenges. And these solutions take many forms, including rethinking the ideas discussed before, and including medical solutions. Solutions must go beyond providing basic support, they require rethinking systems so that individuals are not forced to fight for every accommodation after the fact. Proactive solutions must be built into education, employment, healthcare and community from the outset. Of course, no matter where they are, many will need help in navigating the other side of the door. The real world is messy to navigate. There is a lot more to say on this topic, but I hope I have given you enough today to mull over. We need to change these narratives, create opportunities and work on solutions, so that neurodiversity becomes more meaningful.